Hi, I'm finally back to do eligibility in episode 11. Eligibility is probably one of the more difficult sections of the IEP. It's extremely complicated and there's a lot to it. So I'm going to go quick, hopefully. Might have to do it in 2 sessions, we'll see. The first thing that's going to happen after you go through the SST process and now we're doing the assessment is the school is going to be doing the assessment. We might take information from the doctor or a psychologist, and we will definitely be looking at parent information. But the ultimate determination, the assessment, is done by the school staff, psychologist, specialist, teacher, special ed teacher, whoever. Once the determination of the eligibility is made, the student also must require special education services to benefit from their education. For example, if the student is performing great and they do have a disability, but they're still performing above what we would expect, and I'm going to get into this a little bit more, but if they're performing higher than what our expectations would be looking at their assessments, then they may not qualify for special education because they're performing already higher than they should be, or as high as we can expect them to. And also, special education services cannot be due to, the eligibility can't be due to limited school experience, economic, cultural, or environmental disadvantage, poor school attendance. If any of this is playing into the process to a great degree, special ed is inappropriate. You need to correct these things, correct the school experience and the attendance, and deal with those issues, and then we're going to look at the eligibility again. And perhaps they would qualify at that point. I'm going to go through the different disabilities. There's 13. I'm going to cover 12. One of the disabilities is for 2 to 5 year olds, and once they're 5, it drops off. It's a medical disability, so I'm not going to deal with that one. Intellectual disability, this is a student has significantly below average general intellectual functioning and deficits in adaptive functioning skills, life skills. So they have a fairly low IQ and they have not been able to adapt. So they need help with bathing, eating perhaps. It depends where they are. But the parents will get a questionnaire and we'll deal with the life skills. Hard of hearing and deaf is a permanent or fluctuating loss of hearing which cannot be corrected. Very straightforward, pretty simple. Speech and language impairment. These are exceptional needs due to language or speech disorder. 2 different things. The language and the speech are not the same. Speech has to do with your articulation, your voice, your fluency. Language has to do with your ability to understand receptively language and express language. So you may be students, and babies develop their receptive language first. They can say, you can tell a child, go get a book, and they can go get a book, but they can't maybe say, I'm getting a book. So the receptive usually develops first, then the expressive, and this is what we're looking at when we're dealing with the language disorder. Visual impairment, loss that interferes with education even when corrected. Very straightforward. A student can qualify, let me just back up here a second. A student may get speech and language services, but this may not be an eligibility. That's extremely common. So they may qualify under autism and then they're getting speech as well. And the speech deficit is encompassed within the autism, so you don't really need another eligibility. And all this stuff gets super complicated, but hopefully your team will explain it to you, and I'm just touching on these things quickly. Orthopedic impairment. The impairment, even with correction, adversely affects educational performance. So the student has cerebral palsy and they need support in some way. Cerebral palsy is I'm just using that as an example, but sometimes there's intellectual functioning that's outside of the norm. Sometimes the student is very typically developing in that way. So that's going to depend on the services, and all these things, I'll get into that in a minute. I'll take that. The disability does not drive services. Services are based on what the student needs, not on their label. So we'll cover that a little bit more. This is a really complicated one. Emotional disturbance. The student exhibits one or more of the following criteria over an extended period of time to a marked degree. This is Ed code. Extended period of time, how long is that? Who knows? Typically, we go by 6 months to a marked degree. That is also who knows what the heck they meant by that too, but we usually go by, is it interfering with their education? Is whatever the emotional disturbance is that impacting them educationally? So the things that we're looking at is an inability to learn that cannot be explained by their intellectual, sensory, or health factors. So there's nothing else going on, but the student is still impacted and unable to learn. An inability to build or maintain satisfactory interpersonal relations, and this was with peers and teachers or adults, either one. So they can't make friends, and it's not due to some other reason. Inappropriate types of behavior or feelings under normal circumstances. This is very evident in schools oftentimes. Typically, a student gets out at a handball game and they get at the end of the line and they wait their turn. This child may get out at the handball game and throw a complete fit, run away, jump off the swings, whatever. There's inappropriate actions or feelings to a normal circumstance. Every kid gets out at handball sooner or later, even those really great athletes. A general mood of unhappiness or depression. Physical symptoms or fears associated with personal or school problems. So this is when the child has a headache, they get a stomach ache when they have a test, something like that. So we're looking at all these areas. They just need to have one of these for an extended period to a marked degree. And we also look at multiple settings. We're looking at information from the classroom, the playground, the home. So we're going to look at multiple settings. Other health impaired, student has limited strength, vitality, or alertness due to chronic or acute health problems. This is where ADHD often comes in, is under other health impaired. They may have a learning disability also, and then that would be the top one. But another area that often has other health impaired is for ADHD. Not exclusively, of course. Down syndrome oftentimes comes in through here, variety of conditions. Deaf and blindness, and this is when the student is both deaf and blind. And the combination of visual impairment and hearing and visual impairment that the student cannot benefit from a program for the deaf or the blind. So they need to have a program for both. Multiple disabilities, the student demonstrates more than one disability. This isn't just like autism and a learning disability or speech problem. Usually involves intellectual functioning and some other of the low incidence disabilities. And they need a specialized setting. This is our big one. The majority of our students are specific learning disability. And this is a processing disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes. This isn't a student that is just not doing well in school and needs tutoring. Special ed, like I've said before, is not tutoring. These are the things they're going to work on in the resource program. They're going to work on attention, visual processing, not vision, but how does your brain process visual information? Auditory processing, not hearing. How does your brain process auditory information? Sensory motor skills, association, conceptualization, expression with cognition. So those are what we're looking at, and a discrepancy must exist between where we expect the student to be, where their IQ is, so they have a 100 IQ average, but they're functioning at 75. Their academics are way down here, so they're not balanced. If you have an IQ of 100, you have one of these processes, but you're also functioning at 100, then special ed may not be appropriate because you're already getting what you need to get out of the general ed program. So between expected achievement, which is your IQ, and your actual achievement. And this is another one of our popular ones right now. And I say popular because the fact of the matter is this stuff cycles. When I first got into education years ago, Tourette's was very popular. I haven't seen a Tourette's kid in years. So I don't know where the Tourette's kids went. They probably are now being labeled autistic. So autism is a developmental disability significantly affecting verbal communication, nonverbal communication, and social interactions, which adversely affects educational performance. All these disabilities have to be impacting education, or special ed isn't appropriate. The indicators. These are in the news all the time. Lack of oral language usually doesn't develop. It's not developed by 3. Students behind. They're not really making noises or trying to speak. History of extreme withdrawal. Relating to people inappropriately. Continued impairment in social interactions from infancy. So as a child, most babies love to be cuddled and hugged and smoochied, and oftentimes students with autism, our children, they are so sensitive to touch or noise that they don't particularly want to be cuddled, or they don't give eye contact when they're infants. Desire to maintain sameness. Extreme preoccupation with objects or inappropriate use of objects. For example, they line their crayons up in a row according to color, or their trucks are all lined up according to all the police cars, the fire engines, the trucks. They're not playing with them in a typical imaginative way. They're playing with them or using them in a way that's different or inappropriate. Extreme resistance to controls and peculiar motoric mannerisms. They're flapping, and that's just that's a stereotypical one. There's so many different things that kids do. Sometimes you think they're doing things and you can't even notice. And that's kind of where we try to help our students with autism develop those kinds of things what they need to release, but we're going to give them a tool where they can do that and not be drawing attention to themselves. So anyway, this is the basic eligibilities. There's 12. The 12 that we use primarily in elementary school. A student must have the disability and be deficient in some way academically in school. So anyway, that was a quick run through on eligibility. If you have any questions, post them and I will address them later. Thank you for coming. Bye.